Welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Episode 10, Retail's New Front Door. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, we're talking about essential number 4, mobile, with help from our very special guest, Stephan Schambach, founder and CEO of Newstore, Inc., and founder and CEO of Demandware, now Salesforce Commerce Cloud, who we'll meet and we'll chat with him a bit later in the episode. Steve, in our episodes leading up to the 8 Essentials, this part of the podcast, season 1 that we're in now, you described some as table stakes, and then you described some as essential differentiators. In other words, there's some that if you really work on, you can stand out. Where and how do you see mobile? And it's been evolving. How do you put that in the framework? Where do you see that between essential and table stakes now?
It's hard to imagine not seeing mobile as a table stake at this point. Over the last few years, and certainly accelerated by COVID, as I think every episode we talk about how everything's been accelerated by COVID. You think about, and we get into this with Stephan a little bit, how joined at the hip most consumers are to their smart device. So as smart device adoption has been skyrocketing over the last, say, 8-9 years, mobile's just become such a part of many people's shopping experiences. And I remember a few years ago, one of the senior folks at Target talked about mobile really being the front door to the store. And what they were getting at, which has certainly been my experience with some other retailers, is that so many shoppers are either discovering a retailer's store on their mobile device or are somehow or other using that mobile device during a shopping journey. So whether it starts online or not, and online more and more means a mobile device, a smart device,
Mobile first,
it's somewhere in that journey. One of the things I get to in the book a little bit is this idea that Google's been promulgating for a few years is winning the mobile moments that matter. And part of what their research shows, which I think probably comports with most people's experience, particularly over the last year or two, is if you go to check store hours or inventory availability or whatever you might be doing in that customer journey, and you're using your smart device, and if your preferred retail brand doesn't show up in minimally a relevant way, but ideally in a remarkable way, you really risk having that customer drop out of that journey. So I really feel like mobile's just become so intrinsic to so many shopping journeys that it's hard to imagine a retailer that can get by without a pretty compelling presence.
Well, and we've said this often before, this podcast isn't a history lesson, but you and I have been around long enough to remember that when you left your house and you forgot your wallet, that was a big deal. You'd turn around. And now when I leave the house and I don't have my mobile phone, I feel all discombobulated. Like I'm like, even if I'm transacting with it or not, like it's become such an important part of our lives, for good or ill, depending on how we use it. Thank you for Apple for introducing the screen time monitor, by the way. A little eye-opening, unfortunately, every now and then. I want to follow up on something you said, though, that let's talk about, again, in this, is it table stakes or is it a differentiator? How do you actually become remarkable with your mobile offering? Like, do you see this kind of mobile first attitude in developing it a key to that? Like, how do you think about being remarkable on mobile when it's so ubiquitous and so common?
It's certainly getting harder and harder. A lot of times, and I know we've touched on this in earlier episodes, I'm a big fan of mapping out the customer journey and really understanding where you need at least, let's say, a parity level of performance. You don't necessarily have to distinguish yourself on many aspects of a mobile shopping journey. But if you don't show up in a decent way, what's remarkable, what people will notice is that how bad the experience is. And that was what I was getting at a couple minutes ago, which is, if I want to check inventory availability, let's say, or I want to order a latte from a coffee shop, when it comes to Starbucks, that's a really easy experience. When maybe it comes to the independent retailer, I can't do it at all. Well, you might actually lose the sale. So there's an aspect of just being at parity with what has become the competitive standard. But certainly if you're going to be remarkable, you have to find those things that are very customer relevant and really differentiate yourself. So that's going to vary depending upon the retailer. But going back to Starbucks, for example, I think they've become pretty remarkable in this aspect because it's no one thing that they do. I think it's the whole of the customer journey and how you can basically manage if you want to have a deep relationship with Starbucks, plenty of people don't, but if you do, you can really manage your whole experience and interaction with the brand on your mobile device, because you can do just about anything you can imagine using your mobile device.
It's interesting you bring up Starbucks, and that's often, of course, the example that's brought up. I think for our second season, I really want to get Panera Bread onto the show, because when I think digital, Panera is actually I actually think they're out in front of Starbucks now in terms of what they're doing. I know their SVP, George Hansen, I've interviewed him for another podcast before he went to Panera. He's a brilliant, brilliant operator, and they're doing their percentages of stuff ordered online and ordered on mobile is off the charts.
Yeah.
So it's a really great lesson. I want to come back to something, and again, not to dwell on the history, but I remember the days. I have this literal one of these tipping point days. I was still at Hudson's Bay Company, and I was in the store, and I had my mobile phone, and I was taking pictures of some products on the shelf for something I was doing for their .com, and I quickly got surrounded by LP people, talking into their sleeves. There was a time when you brought a phone out in a store that was very uncomfortable for retailers, and that now you've gone to this point of adopting. And how do retailers think about that? Do you think it's gone from being the price checker always in your hand? It's always there. It is this winning of the moment to this thing that's being welcomed. Like how do you pivot from both of those two things? How do you merge those two thoughts together?
Well, as a general maxim or mantra or whatever, I would say that resistance is futile when it comes to some of these innovations. Right. Obviously things come along that don't stick, and retailers might be able to say control or affect their adoption. I don't know when the
QR code in the early days, the QR code came up and suddenly it was on everybody's front window. It was hideously ugly, and nobody, suddenly that kind of died away. It's back now, by the way, as Stephan tells us.
Yeah, there's probably a whole book in just the journey of the lonely journey of the QR code. But, technology and consumer behavior, once they start to gain some steam, whether we're talking about QR codes or mobile or whatever, to put your head in the sand and try to make believe it isn't going to happen, and to fundamentally fight with customers about behavior that they're going to want to engage in, I think is really an exercise in futility. Now, there's always this period where it's not clear how that's going to play out. And there's this period where the investment you might need to make as a retailer to, put Wi-Fi in all your stores and be able to carry all the traffic and all those kinds of things. It's not a trivial decision. So I think it's important to pay attention, but to try to get customers to change inherently what they want to do by virtue of your actions as one retailer, I think is just kind of silly.
On the other end of the spectrum, it feels like retailers would love to adopt a more harmonized, to use your word, experience for customers. Because I think in the early days, literally a couple of years ago, you would have a great experience on your mobile device because you could manage that for your customers, and then they'd walk in the store and they'd have an experience that felt like 1970. Yeah, that's really to me the gnarly part of this break in whether it's the customer journey or the customer experience that is really today often the case. It's amazing on the mobile. You walk in and you're like, huh. So I guess it's kind of like a race to parity in some kind of way, shape, or form.
Well, the thing I get to in the book, I think that points at this, is that mobile or smart devices in a lot of ways are really the channel buster, right? Because, and I know we talked about this earlier, but if you go back not all that long ago, when we were talking about online shopping, that was something you were doing from your home or office on a dedicated home computer or office computer, right? And when you were in a store, for the most part, you were in the store. You didn't have any technology really to speak of that was enabling that shopping experience. Then 2007, 2008, out comes the iPhone and then the Android phone. And we're in this whole new world where the lines become increasingly blurred. And so when you've got consumers with this powerful device with them pretty much 24/7, number one, you can always be shopping. So you're standing in line at the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever, and you can instantly be shopping. But to your point, when you walk in the store, whatever experience you've had in a digital realm on your smart device suddenly can be quite jarring if that experience doesn't transcend into the physical world. So I think it's a very different way of operating, and a lot of retailers are certainly playing catch up, but many of them have used this, as I think is true with lots of innovation. You can fight it and hope it's going to go away and probably end up being a laggard and needing to catch up later. Or you can say, this is interesting. How do I turn it to my advantage? Either to make sure I don't fall behind, which is more the parity idea, or perhaps find a way to make it more memorable, more remarkable, and really give me a point of differentiation. So it's often hard to figure that out. When's the right time to take the plunge? But I think we see a lot of the leaders today are the ones that moved early on it.
Well, we should probably take the moment now and bring on our guest, Stephan Schambach, because he was, of course, an early visionary in many things e-commerce with Demandware. I mean, now Salesforce Commerce Cloud. I mean, that fundamentally changed the way many people looked at e-commerce. And now he's got this Newstore, which, he takes this idea of mobile and puts it into the back room and into the associates' hands. So let's have a listen with our interview with Stephan.
Well, Stephan, thanks so much for joining us on the Remarkable Retail podcast. We always like to start out by getting a little bit more information about our guests. So if you wouldn't mind, could you start off telling us a little bit about yourself and the work you do?
I'm Stephan Schambach. I'm a software entrepreneur in e-commerce. I've never been employed. I built 3 notable companies in the space: Intershop, which was on-premise software for e-commerce; Demandware, which runs most of the major brands' e-commerce sites, and it's now called Salesforce Commerce Cloud; and Newstore, which is the company that I'm currently running. Newstore is interesting in the sense that it's not strictly an e-commerce play. Newstore is an omnichannel platform for brands and retailers that essentially allows them to run their stores as part of their website. And the store associates have sort of a smartphone app to run all the omnichannel operations.
Excellent. Well, I think I first learned about you a little bit when I learned about Newstore, but I learned more about you when I was working on writing the book, because I came across your excellent book, Makeover, How Mobile Flipped the Shopping Cart. And I wondered if we could just start briefly on that. When you say we live in a world of flipped expectations, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, that was pre-COVID, obviously, right?
Right.
To some degree, the predictions I made in the book, they took a while to actually become reality, but COVID changed all that. And everything I sort of thought would happen in a much longer time frame is suddenly reality and is here today.
What we've been calling the Great Acceleration, right? Is this the shot through this cannon of time?
Right. And for Newstore, it was actually, initially a shock with, our customers having to close their doors and so forth. But then we got a real surge of demand from brands who basically wanted to do what I described in the book.
Yeah. It's Michael and I have talked several times about how, because I wrote my book, or finished writing my book just about a year ago, actually, and certainly didn't see COVID coming, and kind of like you, a number of the predictions that I thought would take 3, 4, 5 years perhaps to come true happened in 3, 4, 5 months.
It's really interesting. Let me give you a couple of examples. I mean, obviously there are sort of the typical sort of omnichannel is something that retailers initially thought about as an additional level of service and convenience. Now it's a necessity, because if you can't do it as a brand, you can't access the inventory necessarily, right? So it's becoming a sort of tool for survival. Another example, which is more like a consumer-centric one, is touchless payments. We got, at least in Europe, this is, I think, where this started, we got into a situation where if you can't read a QR code with your phone, you can't eat out.
Right?
Because there are no menus in restaurants anymore. Because of COVID, they're not legal anymore. You have to read a QR code, and then you are directed to a website that has the menu on it. So everybody can do this now. So what does it mean for us? We have a payment method. It's called Newstore Checkout. That's essentially an e-commerce payment method where instead of using your credit card or your phone with a payment terminal, you can basically pay with your phone on the phone of the store associate. So, no additional hardware required, but you need to be able to read the QR code. And the big challenge was always that the retailers weren't sure whether they really wanted to ask their store associate that they ask their customers to scan a QR code. But that has all gone away. Everybody knows how to do this, so no problem. And
how funny is the resurgence of the QR code? It was mocked, 3-4 years ago. It appeared, and then it's so ugly. And then we all mocked it as kind of useless because it really wasn't being used. And now, talk about a renaissance. Suddenly the QR code is everywhere and vital. In fact,
absolutely.
Just to do the average thing. It's so interesting. I want to pick up on this thread of payments on the mobile device. So, we've seen this acceleration, perhaps we could say, in cashless. So whether it's contactless payment with a credit card or whether it's moving on to the phone, certainly payments moving onto the phone will accelerate e-commerce because, you don't need that third arm, so to speak. One to hold the phone, one to put in the order, one to hold the credit card. How do you square up, and what do you think the future is for cash? I mean, on the one hand, we can see it clearly. We could see it in some places. On the other hand, in America, in Canada, there's tens of millions of people who are unbanked and really can't do without cash. So how do we think about squaring those things, and what do you think is the future there?
On the one hand, for the brands themselves, cash is a struggle because the amount of cash that vertically integrated brands and retailers, or specialty retailers, I'm not talking about supermarkets and such, but the amount that of cash that a specialty retailer takes has been declining over the years. And now you have this situation where it's a relatively small part of the business, but the part that requires the most processes and bureaucracy. That's not just the handling of the cash itself. There's also fiscalization in many countries, not in the US, but in many other countries all over Europe, for example, or in Brazil, or in many Asian countries. Fiscal authorities basically want to know about every transaction and want to have it digitally signed, somewhere so that it can't be altered. That makes handling, and it's all motivated by cash, right? By, they don't want any VAT fraud. They don't want any money laundering through retail. It's all driven by cash. So cash is a hassle. Whereas e-commerce doesn't need to do that. And you can use e-commerce payment methods in stores, and they have other advantages. They transmit the data that you need to send a receipt. But also, if you have to ship something from a different location because it wasn't available in the store, it will provide the shipping address without requiring the customer to type anything in. So, my prediction is that we are moving e-commerce payment methods into the store, and that will be, for specialty retail, will be a very popular payment method. And, cash, it is what it is. It's from some brands, it's 5%, for others, it's 10%, but it is declining and it's a lot of work. So, we have customers who basically say, we don't accept cash. It doesn't work in every country, but they are trying. Yeah. We have customers who, in their expansion to other countries have decided, at least in other countries, they opened the stores from the beginning with no cash. So I think, it will be with us for a while, but it's definitely not an increasing trend to take cash.
Hey, well, maybe we could just step back for a second, because one of the things I found really fascinating about some of the things that I ended up including in the book, from your book, was this idea that the smart device has become the centerpiece of so many customers' existence. And I think I quote you as saying the phone isn't just by our side. It's who we are. Curious if you could talk a little bit about how you got to seeing the world that way, and how much has really changed in the last 3 or 4 years since you first.
Well, it's very simple. By observing what I do and what people around me do, what I do is, I openly admit it. The phone is probably the last thing that I put away in the evening, and the first thing that I pick up in the morning.
Yeah. For better or worse, right?
Yeah, for better.
For good or ill. For good or ill.
I know. None of us should do that, but that's what we are doing. And it's with us the entire time. It is our wallet. It is in our keys. I have a Tesla. It's my key. Okay, I basically run my electrical installation at home with it. My heating, my lighting. I open the garage with it. I communicate with it. It's the source of entertainment, music. Otherwise, so it's basically become my everyday computer. And only occasionally, when I need a bigger screen, do I move to my desktop or laptop.
I think it's so interesting how, I've been in retail forever, and we talk a lot about, or at least historically, we talk a lot about location for the store, right? That it's all about having that best location being a great physical store location. But now, since we can always be shopping on our smart device, I think this new best location is really showing up in powerful ways wherever the customer happens to be. And most times that ends up now being on a smart device. Do you see that particularly from your work at Newstore in terms of how you think about the shopping experience and the evolution?
Sure, we see that. And mobile makes it a new form of e-commerce possible. Basically, the type of e-commerce that originates from a store. What I mean by that is I discover a new brand. Let's say it's our customer, Untuckit. By walking past their store, I try on a shirt. I find my size. I buy some shirts, but one is not available in the color I like. I pay in a way that makes it super easy in the same transaction to have something shipped from another store to my home. I'm getting a receipt, and the receipt is basically allowing me to text back with the associate who helped me. And at home, if my wife likes my shirts, I can order a couple more just by texting the associate. And the associate obviously is able to send me the shoppable links or payment links for items that he or she suggests. So I wouldn't say it's just e-commerce and just retail. They are blending in a very interesting way. The stores engage in a type of e-commerce that is essentially additional revenue in the form of remote selling, basically what I just described, or endless aisle, meaning they access inventory that sits elsewhere. Yeah, and obviously by integrating omnichannel processes like buy online, pick up in store, buy online, ship from store, in a very seamless way.
I almost wonder, and I'd be curious to your perspective on this. I've been starting to say over the last year or so, and I think particularly because of what's happened with COVID, that the way we talk about e-commerce, I think, really has to change. Because when you think about the first wave of e-commerce, it was really a better version of a mail order catalog, right? It was stuff that you could ship through the mail, but you go to a website and you order it. And when you look at the growth of e-commerce until pretty recently, that was mostly what it was about, and stores weren't necessarily particularly part of the equation. But what we've seen with the growth of what I like to call harmonized retail, buy online, pick up in store, obviously being something that's been around for a few years, but particularly in the last 6 months, so much of what we call e-commerce, or so much of what the press talks about as this growth in online shopping, is actually incredibly enabled by physical stores, or it's being home delivered in a very different sort of economic way. So I'm curious, do you agree with that statement?
Totally.
What does that mean going forward?
I want to give you a couple of examples what our customers do. Also, obviously accelerated by COVID. We had these capabilities in our platform, for a while, but most of our customers, just beginning March and April, suddenly rushed to implement all that. I mean, the history of this goes like this. I know that because obviously I was a co-inventor of e-commerce and the shopping cart and all that. Very early, e-commerce was tried out by startups. Then some of the more innovative brands discovered that might be something that they should try. And but there was an internal conflict in almost all the brands where the retail side saw this as competition and they wanted to shut it down. So the CEOs decided that they have to have e-commerce reporting directly to them and protect it. So the fact that it became a silo was by design. It was by design because the retail side of the business would otherwise kill it. This is how it grew, but obviously for organizational reasons mostly, there was no integration between online and offline. Now, nowadays, just fast forward a little bit, we find ourselves in a situation where finding new customers, first-time buyers for a brand online is very expensive because there is a duopoly between Facebook and Google, both having sort of automated algorithms that drive up the price, the bidding, algorithms that they're using. So, for a $100 basket for first-time purchase, it's not unheard of to pay $30 to $40 to Google. So, long story short, we are now in a situation where vertically integrated brands who want to sort of be less dependent on wholesale, they open stores. They open stores not because to run them as profit centers, but to basically acquire new customers and provide sort of a service location for shipping of items, for exchange, for general customer service and so forth. And it's about half as expensive to acquire a new customer in a retail location if it's a strategically placed small one than on average than to win that customer online only. So it became an indispensable part. Integrating retail into a brand's vertically into a brand strategy became an indispensable part of their business plan.
I talk about that in my book about how ironic it is because so many of those brands really raised the first round or two of their venture capital based upon the idea that you don't need stores. And then all of a sudden it was like, well, it turns out maybe we actually do. So Stephan, as you look ahead, one of the things I thought was particularly interesting in your book is you talk about all these different sort of makeovers that retailers need to consider, particularly with respect to mobile. But now that we've accelerated so much, I'm curious, what's next? What are those types of makeovers that you feel a lot of retailers need to make to really not only get through the COVID times, but position themselves for success when hopefully we get to some level of recovery?
I think building their consumer direct strategy into something that they can completely rely on. I mean, most vertically integrated brands come from almost like a wholesale only background, and then they had a website, and maybe they kind of played around with retail a little bit, but it became painfully clear that wholesale partners cannot be relied upon, and maybe so. What in the future, successful brands, they're going to look like this. They're very strong in e-commerce. They have flagship stores in large cities, few of them. They're totally integrated with the website. They're obviously run with smartphones, or basically the way they run them is they have the entire functionality required in every associate's hand. And then they may have a little bit of wholesale in the form of integration with curated marketplaces. By curated, I don't mean Amazon. I mean Farfetch, for example. It's a curated marketplace. Yeah. So that's sort of the future. And obviously, all the omnichannel use cases, touchless payments, and so forth. And what is different this year compared to last year was that last year, or before COVID, we would only do business with visionary brands like Untuckit, for example, who recognized that this is what they wanted to do. What's happening now is that we have a long list. we have a waiting list. Everybody wants to do it like that.
All of a sudden, everyone has a waiting list. We love Untuckit. We've had Lockie Andrews on the show, and one of your other brands, I think, is Burton Snowboards, and I had the opportunity to interview Jeff Lord for one of my other podcasts. So, I just wanted to kind of wrap up and ask you, when you look at your base of clients and when you look at the prospective clients and you look at the universe, who's really this mobile first, this integration, who are the real visionaries? Who should we look to watch what they're doing to understand what you've just articulated as the future in retail?
What you're seeing is that there are a few brands that are so big and so good in IT that they can roll their own. Nike would be an example for that, or Apple, right? And what you're going to see is there's a lot of very successful mid-sized brands like Burton Snowboards that in the foreseeable future, let's say the next 6 to 12 months, will completely change the way they do business in stores, and they will run their stores much more like a website, much more data driven. So I think that's the biggest change that you're going to see. It is difficult for very small mom and pop type of shops because they won't reach that network effect where they can use stores as fulfillment centers and so forth. So, what we provide really works well for, if you have at least, a certain size, let's say, some mid-sized brand and up.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, Stephan, thanks so much. This has been terrific. You've got obviously this view across a wide spectrum of sectors from your current role and have been at this for quite some time. So we really appreciate your taking the time to spend some time with us on the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Stephan, really, thanks to him for joining us all the way from Germany today. It's interesting to listen to his perspectives because on the one hand, he's such a visionary leader. And not only visionary leader in the kind of, I see the future, but actually makes the future possible with his companies. Clearly an innovator. His ideas around putting content onto the mobile device that is way beyond just transaction and more, you said at the beginning, retail's new front door. It's almost like retail's new back door as well, like into the warehouse and into the associate's mind. What did you think of his view of the future and its role, the mobile's role in the stores?
I think it's super interesting, and certainly we just see this incredible migration to kind of all things mobile, whether we're talking about consumer behavior or we're talking about store associate operations. I mean, it's really been pretty incredible. Certainly in the last few months, trying to. So many retailers are having a hard time keeping pace with how much has shifted to mobile, and including things like some of the inventory challenges and curbside pickup right now is a whole other aspect of technology implementation and consumer behavior. So I think certainly he's got way more experience on that front than I do, so I'll defer to his experience. But it certainly
lines up with what I'm
seeing. Oh yeah, he's working.
Yeah, I mean, he almost said phygital, which he almost owed his client Locky some money for that kind of integration. I mean, I had a couple of threads thinking out of there to explore with you. I wanted to talk about, like, first of all, it's interesting that as you think about conversion on the mobile device, one of our past guests, Jason Goldberg, talked about. Listen, you need transactional, you need your Apple Pay or whatever, because right now it's not equal, right? You get a better conversion on e-commerce on your desktop than your mobile device. So we're not quite there yet. The other thing I wanted to explore a little bit, and again, this isn't by any means a political podcast, but it is the reality that there are a lot of unbanked citizens in North America, people who do not have a bank account, therefore people who do not have Apple Pay. They might have a mobile device, but do retailers risk leaving customers behind by going to a world that is all cashless and all mobile? I mean, do you have any thoughts of that from a strategy perspective, other than there's a social justice issue, but do you have any thoughts on that as a strategy issue?
Oh, I do. I think there are a couple places where sometimes we get it wrong because we don't understand that a significant percentage of our customers are not necessarily in the same situation that we are, right? So most executives, I would assume, at retailers or tech executives are reasonably affluent, right? They're not worrying about where their next meal is coming from. So the idea that there may be millions of customers that don't have a bank account is very foreign to them. Same issue on, I often find people who push back on, why does somebody want to order online and pick up at a store? Isn't that a hassle? And there's certainly complex reasons why people might do that. Maybe it's immediate gratification. Maybe they don't want the shipping charges. Maybe they're going past the store anyway, and it's just as easy to get it and whatever. But there's also a large percentage of people in most countries that have no safe, reliable way of getting a package delivered to their home because of porch piracy and so forth. So I do think a lot of retailers miss or risk missing an important segment to their business potentially if they're not mindful of the real life circumstances. And so I do think there's some limiting factor certainly on contactless payment until some of those other issues are addressed.
Well, I guess it does get to the strategy of deciding who your customer is and who they're not. I mean, if you're a retailer and you decide to move to cashless payment, by virtue of that, your customers are going to go where they can. If a portion of your customers just love to pay in cash, they're going to go somewhere else, right? To someone who does accept it. So I guess it's about a business decision as much as anything else. Though I've seen in I think it was in Philadelphia, New York City, the government's saying, "Listen, Amazon Go, you have to accept cash." So I'm not sure where that's going to go actually in the short and medium term. The other thing I wanted to talk about is this idea of the associates and the associates' role. So you and I have been watching, I wouldn't say over the course of our career, but certainly lately, the getting incremental store traffic in and across the threshold of stores is just harder every day. So I've talked to retailers who are turning their minds to, how do I do a better job of conversion? Like, how do I do a better job of making sure that people in the store buy something? And I think this leveling of the playing field for associates is vital, that they have knowledge and then they can interact and then they can make sure that it happens. It feels like mobile will have a big, big role in that. What do you think?
Well, I think we have to, if you're a retailer, you have to find a way to make it easier for your sales associates to meet the customer where they are. And in some cases, that's literally physical, right? Like, if every single time you get asked a question, you have to go find your manager or go on the point of sale system or whatever, that's not a very customer-friendly experience.
Or you read the package together with the customer together. Right. It's my favorite experience.
So I think there's an aspect of good customer service, which is staying with the customer, not having to peel off to do other things. And that'll become more important when we hopefully get back to some semblance of normalcy. I think the other thing, which was something that I've noticed over the years, is that one of the things that the internet is fabulous at is giving information to people. And so consumers can do and do so much research online. And I'll use a very old example, but when we first launched Sears.com a million years ago, one of the things we observed was that a lot of consumers were coming in having pretty much decided what brand or what particular product they were interested in. And the conversion discussion with the sales associate was really going deep on features and benefits. Why do I want the Maytag over the Whirlpool? Right. Or why do I want 14 cycles versus 12 cycles or whatever?
I've got it down to two. Help me decide.
I've really narrowed it down, but I really need to understand the differences to close the sale. It's tough for a given sales associate to have the level of expertise that the entire internet has about a particular product. Or, people read reviews and say, well, some customers say X, Y, and Z. Is that your experience? Well, if you're a new sales associate in particular, you may not have had any actual experience with that. So I think part of the technology enablement of the internet and digital more broadly is arming the sales associates to at least be at parity with the consumer, but hopefully be able to add value-added pieces. The mobile component is the thing that really detaches you from being anchored to point of sale or having to go talk to a manager or go find a manual or something like that. So I think it's hugely important. I also think that mobile, we're seeing a lot more. This isn't so much about conversion in the store of literal store traffic per se, but where we see more of this virtual shopping going on or appointment-based shopping where perhaps the visit, so to speak, starts when the consumer is remote, but the sales associate, whether they're store-based or maybe in a call center or something, is engaging with the customer face-to-face. They're just doing it through their smart device as opposed to literally in person.
I have a fun example. So today we happen to be recording on Black Friday, and in where I am in Toronto, stores are closed, so only essential stores are open. So a good friend of mine who owns a menswear store called Got Style, Melissa, is running a new campaign called the Blackout Day. So she's taking a shot online every time someone buys something together with. So she's live streaming, and she's calling it the Blackout Friday. Which is her take on a very dark integration of mobile and live streaming, and now it's a necessity. Like that's the kind of fun example. But retailers are telling me today, I got associates in the store people can't talk to. They can't come in the store. Right. So they're doing the walk around, and I think that's another thing that just gets accelerated everywhere is that the associates are taking a more important role in what's in their hand and connecting to customers is just going to be so vital. I wanted to wrap up this episode. I wanted to dedicate this episode to the noble QR code, which has had a renaissance. I couldn't imagine saying such a thing 3 years ago. I thought it was a bit of a never use it kind of thing. But now it's, as Stephan said, you're ordering food with it, and it's mandatory, and so amazing in the world of these things. So listen, I had a great episode, a great exploration, and it was a great discussion with Stephan. Great to have him on. Steve, why don't you read us out for this episode?
If you like what you heard, you can subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. Please rate and review, and be sure and recommend to a friend or colleague in the retail brand or CPG industry. I'm Steve Dennis. You can learn more about me on stephenpdennis.com, and be sure and look for me on LinkedIn and Twitter for my latest insights.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, producer and host of the Voice of Retail podcast. You can learn more about me on www.meleblanc.co, of course on LinkedIn. Have a safe week, Steve, and I look forward to talking to you in the next episode.